All right, hello, this is NTI Day 20, and we're going to be talking about the post-war boom, life in America in the 1950s. So we realize the war's over and America has been victorious. So these millions of soldiers who have left to go fight come back home. Well, what is it like when they come back home? All right, so first thing is they come back and a lot of them try to go back to their old jobs, and most of them get their old jobs back, but there's just nowhere for them to live. Some of them were 17, 18 years old living at home with mom and dad, and they come home and they're 24 years old. They don't want to live with mom and dad anymore, so they need a place to live. This is when the suburbs were born. Okay? A lot of them came from the big city. They moved to the suburbs, and these houses are mass produced. There was a developer who bragged that he could build a home for about $7,000 and have one done every 16 minutes. He had construction crews that were out everywhere, and so the suburbs pop up outside of the cities, which leads to people moving to the suburbs and leaving the cities. There was a lot of conflict that developed because while the men were away working, women took their place, or men were away fighting, women took their place working. And there were a lot of women who wanted to remain in the workforce once their husbands came home. And this is going to lead to a surge in divorce for a lot of couples. Sometimes women, if their man was gone for 4 years, divorced them while they were overseas. But those that stayed loyal, a lot of them, have problems. Their husband has been gone for 4 or 5 years, and they've been doing things on their own for that amount of time, and now they don't like the man coming back and just telling them how to do everything. Okay, so divorce rates are going to surge. We're finally out of the Depression now. The economy is doing great. People are traveling. People are buying things. The mass production 24/7 for 4 years of fighting has really brought the economy back, and people are ready to buy and spend money. The 50s are kind of remembered as the best, like the apex of American history, the top of American history. And, these people have money now, the war's over, and they're ready to spend. Despite all this, there were still problems. Labor strikes were a problem. Coal miners, steel workers, railroad workers went on strike a lot of times. Harry Truman was the president. He did not want this to damage the economy and bring us back into the Depression. So he basically threatened the strikers with drafting them and putting them in the military if they didn't get back to work. And it worked because they didn't want to go back. A lot of these people didn't want to go into the military. The war was over, but we have this problem with Russia looming, with the Soviet Union. So we still have lots of troops in Europe. We have troops in Japan still as we're rebuilding. So they didn't want to go off to other parts of the world. They decided that they would get back to work. Truman made a really unpopular decision in 1948. He decided to desegregate the military. We had gone around the world to fight for freedom of people who weren't Americans, and we have a group of people in America that were not free, that were being, that were racially segregated against. And so Truman had a problem with that, even though he was from the South. So he desegregated the armed forces. He also did this during an election year, he was a Democrat. The Republicans felt like, we've won. He's he shot himself in the foot. There's no way he will win this election. But he did it because he thought it was right. He didn't care what it did to him politically. He did what he thought was right. And just a side note, this was 1 year after baseball desegregated. So Jackie Robinson played in 1947 in the major leagues, and the military isn't going to desegregate until after baseball does. So the Republicans pretty much feel like they're going to win. Thomas Dewey, the governor of New York, is running against him. He basically does nothing. He sits back and waits to become president. Truman is going to travel nonstop, crazily all over the country, making speeches, doing things like that. And Truman wins. He wins a very close race. Actually, the Chicago Tribune, a very famous newspaper, is going to, on their front page, is going to announce that Dewey defeats Truman. There's a very famous photograph you'll see in the notes of Harry Truman holding that newspaper up. It says Dewey defeats Truman, and Truman actually won. So you can see he's got a big smile on his face and is enjoying this victory. You see a map of the electoral votes. You know, it looks like Truman won by quite a bit, but, you know, he barely got enough electoral college votes to win. Dewey won mostly in the North. There was a third-party candidate who challenged Truman some in the South, but Truman won most of the South. All right. Now, Truman wins, but things don't go real well after that. There's going to be some problems, and his approval rating is going to sink to 23%. You know, Trump is in the probably mid to low 40s as far as his approval rating goes in these polls, and 23% is low. And he has pretty much has a miserable second term in office. Lots of problems, the Korean War, McCarthyism, China is going to fall to communism. Lots of bad things happen. He takes all the blame. All right, so everybody starts looking forward to the 1952 election. And both sides want the same person to run for them. Could you imagine the Democrats and Republicans fighting over Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump or whoever? You know, we would never see that happen. But there was one man that both sides knew would win an election if he ran, and that was Dwight Eisenhower. He's the hero of World War II, the American general who was in charge of our victory over the Nazis. Okay, and he's going to choose the Republicans to run for. And so he's going to win in a landslide. He's a former general. He seems like the perfect person to lead us in this fight against communism. And so just about everybody votes for Eisenhower. They call him Ike, is his nickname. Richard Nixon is his vice president. But Ike wins in a huge victory. If you look at the map, he received 442 electoral college votes to Adlai Stevenson. He got 89. So this was a just historic blowout, one of the biggest victories you'll ever see in an election. So getting back to the American family, at this point, America has the highest standard of living in the world. We don't rank at the top, not even really close today. But things were great in America during the 50s. New businesses and technology created a lot of opportunities. My grandfather was in advertising in the 50s when television began, and he produced a bunch of television commercials at the very beginning of TV. They had John Wayne in them, Mickey Mantle, a lot of famous baseball players. They sold, they did ads for all kinds of different things. I remember seeing cigarette commercials that they did that had doctors in them, and it says 9 out of 10 doctors recommend Winston cigarettes, or something like that. And that was all over television. I remember seeing a Flintstones cigarette commercial. So there were no real barriers for advertisers. They could use a children's cartoon to try to sell cigarettes, and what do you think that did? Kids might have taken up smoking because of it. So, but anyway, television and some other things like that are going to have a big impact on the American family. These major franchises like McDonald's is going to develop some of these, like early AT&T commercials. My grandfather actually came up with the slogan, "Reach out and touch someone," which was an AT&T slogan. Your parents or grandparents probably remember that one. Earlier we talked about people moving to the suburbs and out of the cities. That's one of the things my grandfather did. He worked in New York City, but he lived in the suburbs of New York. So he took a train in every day and out. And, living in the suburbs were a lot nicer. The cities were kind of starting to deteriorate and decay. They were becoming more dangerous. Cars were more readily available, so you could drive back and forth to your job. And so the suburbs are where people wanted to live. They didn't want to live in the big cities anymore. Another thing that happened is something that's called the baby boom. And you've probably heard of baby boomers before. These are people who were born during the baby boom. Okay, and it's going to begin after World War II ends. And so millions of soldiers come home and see their wives for the first time in years, and you can probably figure out why these babies are being born. All right, but it's going to continue basically through the rest of the 50s and the early 60s. This is the largest generation in America's history. And in 1957, which was the year the most babies in American history have been born, there was a baby born in America every 7 seconds. So you can understand why they called this the baby boom. The economy was great, families were back together, and they were having big families. If you look, there's a couple of charts in these notes. And it says 1940, this is before we enter World War I, there were 2.5 million births in a year. 1957, there was 4.3 million. And it's up above 3 million basically for the next 35 years. Okay, so lots and lots and lots of babies being born. So husbands returned and got to see their wives for the first time in a long time. People were getting married younger. The economy was really good, so you could afford to have kids. There were a lot of medical advances that kept young children healthy, and they survived things that they would not have survived in the past. People wanted big families. Now people don't want as many kids on average, because it is so expensive. I don't know if it's a statistic, but there's, a saying out there, and maybe you're on the lower end, maybe you're on the higher end, I don't know, but it costs about $1 million per child from the age of their birth until the age of 18. So that's a lot of money that you're investing in your children. So, thank your parents, because they're investing a lot in you that Maybe they could have done some other things with that money, but they wanted you there instead. Okay, so there's a graph on one of these pages, and it says what it will mean to you up at the top. And I want you guys to take a look at that. It shows the baby boomers where they are in the years 1965, 1995, and 2015. So 65, you can see the baby boomers were mostly, 18, 19 years old and younger. Okay, you flash forward 30 years, there's more baby boomers that have been born, and the largest range, they're in their mid 30s to early 40s. 2015, which was just 5 years ago, they are in their late 50s and to late 60s, the majority of them. So they have reached retirement age. So what does this mean to you? We talked about Social Security back during the Great Depression, and we talked about how you have a job, you pay into Social Security. People that draw Social Security are the retired age people, and those people right now are taking more money out of Social Security than ever in our history. And there's less money in there than there has been because the government uses it. They're probably using this, our Social Security money to deal with the coronavirus epidemic. So they'll just pull money out of Social Security to deal with hurricanes or disease or whatever else, whatever other problems show up, stimulus checks, whatever. And they don't replace it. And so the government's using it, baby boomers at retirement age are using it, you're paying into it. That's one of the many reasons, if they don't change things, it won't be there when you guys reach retirement age. Okay, that's where we're going to stop today. There's more from the 1950s, which you'll see on another video, but I just wanted to get through this first little part here today. So questions. Find out who in your family is baby boomer generation. You can look back in the notes and see when it began, early 50s to, let's say, mid 60s. Maybe a little bit before the early 50s. My parents were born, I think, in 56 and 57, so they're baby boomers. They're retirement age. For you guys, that's probably going to be grandparents. But I want you to figure out who in your family is a baby boomer. So that's number one. Number two, why were so many babies being born? Okay, that's a pretty easy one. And then number three, why were so many people moving to the suburbs? Okay, so those are your three questions that I need you to answer and get to me. So hope you have a good day, and I will see you later. Bye.